Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, today's fire danger, highest fire danger up over the northwest part of the state, western Brooks Range, on down into the northwest interior, and actually right out to the coastline there. And that due to mostly, the dry conditions, but the winds were really the factor in the extreme fire danger up that way. Kivalina seeing northeast winds gusting to 35 miles an hour this afternoon, and Noatak received gusts of 40 miles an hour with low humidities and temperatures into the lower to mid 70s up around in some of those areas, and some extreme fire danger also over the Seward Peninsula, otherwise high to very high fire danger covering the remainder of the peninsula. And interior areas, not bad at all, really much better than it was on Monday over the upper Yukon Valley, just a narrow area there along the river of high to very high fire danger. And with a third of an inch of precipitation falling in the Tanana Valley, it's down pretty good in that area, but high, again, breezy conditions kicked it up into the high to very high fire danger over the Kuskokwim Delta there, and up in the lower Yukon River Valley areas with winds gusting anywhere from 20 to 30 miles an hour, with Bethel reporting gusts to 25 miles an hour. Moving on to the hazardous weather graphics. There are no watches, warnings, or advisories out anywhere in the state for the next day or so. So moving into the weekend, pretty much weather advisory and warning free. Moving on to satellite imagery, you can see low pressure there and a frontal boundary pushing northward and across the southern southeast coast and gradually spreading northward. That brought about 2/3 of an inch of rain over the southern panhandle today at Ketchikan in a 12-hour period ending at 3 p.m. with Juneau picking up just a few hundredths of an inch, or actually over the entire northern panhandle, just a few hundredths of an inch falling in some areas. Other areas didn't pick up anything at all. See a few breaks there over the Copper River Basin, and looks like over the eastern Tanana Valley. But generally, in the last 12 hours, about a third of an inch of precipitation fell over the 40-mile country westward in the central interior, with thunderstorms breaking out in the areas there that started out clear, like along the mid-Yukon River Valley area there east of the Nulato Hills. You can see kind of the whiter top clouds. But back to the northwest, you can see the Seward Peninsula, a lot of sunshine today, and again, temperatures in the lower to mid 70s all through that area, on up into the North Slope with some pretty good sunshine there. And then the cloud band there from the eastern Brooks Range on down in toward the southwest coastal areas, but there was some breaks there over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Valley for some partly sunny skies. Lots of low clouds and fog out over the Bering Sea and Alaska Peninsula, as well as the Aleutians today. But clear skies out to the coastlines, I mentioned on the northwest coast due to the strong offshore flow up there. And rain, south central Alaska, or showers across many areas with about 4/10 of an inch falling in Independence Mine. Otherwise, Talkeetna picked up a quarter of an inch, and 1 to 2/10 of an inch falling in the Anchorage area. And again, you can see that cloud band rolling from northeast to southwest, so probably some showers or thunderstorms will move into the Kuskokwim and Yukon Delta areas here over the next several hours. And that'll continue into the night tonight. But on today's chart, you can see a 997 millibar low, and the thunderstorms breaking out around that, especially along the two troughs there into the eastern interior, and then back down all the way out to the coastline and over the Nulato Hills. And the storm system bringing the rain into the southern southeast coast, the heaviest amounts with much lighter rainfall amounts to the north and even the North Gulf Coast areas. And showers and cloudy skies covering the Alaska Peninsula. A few showers southern Kodiak Island, low clouds, fog, and drizzle over the central Aleutians. And light winds with low clouds and fog over the western Aleutians due to the 1,022 millibar high out in that area. Looking at the forecast for tonight, no change out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians. Widespread areas of IFR due to low clouds, fog, maybe some drizzle around Adak and Atka. Showers Alaska Peninsula, and could see some clearing there over the northern Bering Sea with the drier air, but also some low clouds and fog thrown in and will be on the increase from the Bering Strait down toward Nunivak Island. It'll stay clear with the gusty east winds continuing, or northeast winds along the northwest coast into the interior valleys in the western Brooks Range and along the mountains. Low clouds and fog again possible along the Arctic coast with showers on the east side there. And that trough axis keeps rain and showers going from the eastern Brooks Range right on down across the Koyukuk Valley and toward that low center and then back in toward Togiak Bay. Low center just south of Kodiak Island will circulate some light rain up to the east side. Otherwise, rain and showers for the Panhandle. That'll continue through tomorrow as well. High pressure along the Arctic coast, light winds, low clouds and fog there. Low pressure over Kuskokwim Bay will keep it wet from actually around Kotzebue southward to the Alaska Peninsula. Rain for Kodiak Island. Sunday, rain Kodiak Island, cloudy, wind damp and cool over the southern half of the state with chance of thunderstorms over interior locations. Kotzebue, Noatak Valley, eastward there across the Brooks Range will be the sunniest areas. Low clouds, fog continue for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Overnight lows tonight, lower 30s Arctic coast, 50s in the interior, south of the Alaska Range, mostly in the 40s, as well as the Panhandle and the Aleutians. Highs tomorrow, 60s to lower 70s interior Alaska, upper 50s, lower 60s south central Alaska and the Panhandle, and 30s on the Arctic coast, followed by lows again Sunday morning, not much different from tomorrow morning. And for highs, mostly in the 60s to lower 70s over the interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather graphic for Saturday morning, IFR along the Arctic coast. VFR, most of the interior, eastern Brooks Range to marginal VFR, and south of the Alaska Range and to the east, we've got marginal VFR on the western slopes, or the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, Talkeetna Mountains, areas of the Copper River Basin, Kenai Peninsula, most of the southeast coast, and most of Kodiak Island. IFR, all of the Aleutians and southern Bering Sea to the Pribilof Islands. VFR, northern Bering Sea. And for the afternoon, Pribilofs become VFR, while the northern Bering stays mostly marginal, and we've got IFR on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, north side of the Fox Islands, westward to the Komodorskis, and VFR over the interior. Marginal VFR over the southeast coast on up into the North Gulf Coast and the Wrangell Mountains. IFR now over the eastern Boulevard Sea coast was part of the North Slope becoming VFR, but marginal along the Arctic coast. Sunday morning, better up north there with some marginal VFR, mainly along the central and eastern Arctic coast, and VFR from the North Slope all the way down to southern Alaska, and pick up some marginal VFR, Prince William Sound, east side of the Kenai Peninsula and southeastern Copper River Basin on down the coast of the Panhandle, becoming VFR toward Dixon Entrance, marginal VFR Alaska Peninsula, and southern Bering Sea with IFR, eastern central Aleutians, and another batch coming in out toward Chimyanatu. For the afternoon, mostly IFR again for the Aleutians in two separate zones there. And over the southern Bering Sea, VFR northern Bering, St. Matthew Island, on up into the Chukchi Sea. Marginal VFR along the Arctic coast, and an area of marginal conditions, 40-mile country upper Tanana Valley eastward, Fairbanks, Tanana, and then long end just south of the Yukon River, and some IFR for the Prince William Sound area and North Gulf Coast, marginal for the Panhandle. Passes Anatufik and Abingdon, both VFR tomorrow morning and through the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill, look for marginal VFR flying conditions. Both approaches on each pass. Rainy, same forecast. Windy VFR. And for Isabel, looking pretty marginal tomorrow, as is Mentasta, and throwing a risk of some thunderstorms. And for Tanita, marginal VFR becoming VFR. Portage, marginal, and Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels at around 8,000 feet through the central interior, sloping back to 6,000 feet in the Arctic coast, and also sloping about 6,000 feet over southern Alaska. That extends on out toward the Fox Islands, and then running 6,000 to 8,000 feet over the Panhandle. Icing, areas of mixed, freezing level 16,000 feet, Panhandle, a good portion of the eastern interior south of the Yukon River, Kodiak Island up into areas of Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, on up across Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta to the Lotto Hills. And from there, looking at the 33,000-foot wind flow chart, we've got basically westerly flow just south of the Aleutians, all across the Pacific, and it takes a turn to the north there at about 140 west or so, or 135 west, putting southeast flow up into the eastern North Gulf Coast and near the Panhandle there, coming up over that ridge that's holding over western Canada, with upper level low pressure near Kodiak Island and a general area of low pressure aloft out over the Bering Sea and another center up north of the Arctic coast. 9,000 feet showing low over the southwest interior, and other ones south-southwest of Kodiak Island, and a trough along the southeast coast. Pretty light wind flow over the central and eastern interior, as well as the Panhandle, and northerlies from the Chukchi Sea all the way down across the central and eastern Aleutians, with high pressure making light variable winds over the western Bering Sea. 3,000 feet, about the same pattern, high pressure just west of Attu Island, northerly flow. A little gusty there through the Chukchi Sea, through the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island, but lighter and more variable over interior Alaska, with general ridging off the southeast coast, putting a light northwest breeze there along the coast at this elevation, variable over the southeast interior. Turbulence-wise, look for possible moderate or considerable moderate chop western slopes of the southern slopes of the western Brooks Range and over the southwest hills. After the break, I'll be back to look at the marine forecasts.
When I first started working here in the early 90s, this is where the glacier was. I mean, where we're walking right now would have been a pile of gravel that had been pushed up by the glacier, and then we would have had 100 to 200 foot high cliffs of ice right here. And as you can see, that's changed quite a bit. And if you look at that in 2 dimensions, you can sort of see the terminus used to be here, now it's back there. That gives you one measure. What that kind of 2-dimensional look doesn't show is how much mass has been lost, that the glacier has just sort of deflated. These 200-foot cliffs of ice have disappeared and pulled back to this gentle sloping glacier you see now.
When I was working in Kenai Fjords National Park, I used the topographic maps to navigate where I was, and I realized that the mapping of the glaciers was really off. The glaciers had receded a lot. There were new rivers and lakes that were establishing where the ice used to be or should have been according to the maps. And so then I did a study on this and found out that we had a 5% loss of glacier ice mass in the Kenai Fjords area between 1950 and 1985. Big change.
You know, one of the most compelling things we do, though, to document glacier change is simply take photographs. We've had repeat photography projects here at the park. They may not give you the most accurate data in terms of how much mass or real specific measurements, but what they do give you is a visual representation that can't be argued with. I mean, it really requires no interpretation.
Understanding what's happening, understanding these processes, and possibly being able to predict what's going to happen in the future is the best that we can do, and that requires science and research.
There's considerable research on climate change in Alaska. The most significant, I would say right now, is the Natural Resources Inventory and Monitoring Program, which is looking at change across a wide variety of vital signs or indicators.
Kenai Fjords National Park is actually a pretty good representation of what's going on globally with regards to glacier ice retreat. There have been studies showing that mountain glaciers are retreating all over the planet. There are probably well over 90% of the glaciers are in retreat status. There are a few that are advancing, and some are holding their terminus point. But the Kenai Fjords, the tidewater glaciers are retreating more dramatically, but even the land-based glaciers in the terminus positions are retreating. It's pretty common for all the mountain glaciers. The big mountain glaciers in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, they're mostly in retreat too. We're really entering an interesting phase where what we call the cryosphere, the ice on the planet, is melting.
You know, in the more immediate past, it's clear that since the Pleistocene, glaciers have been retreating. So the idea that glaciers retreat is nothing, is no revelation. They've been retreating from across North America for the last 10,000 years. What appears to have changed and what has people's attention is the rate at which they're retreating. In the case of Exit Glacier, you know, we have scientists who've been looking at it. We have evidence that the glaciers left behind, where we can track that retreat for about the last 200 years. And we can say with confidence that in the last decade, that rate has increased.
Terminus mapping is a great way to map a small portion of the ice field. We come out twice a year and we use a GPS to walk the edge of the terminus and map the farthest extent of Exit Glacier. And that allows us to see what type of changes are occurring over the winter accumulation period and the summer ablation period. With that data, that can help us as we witness these changes within the ice field. We can hopefully be able to correlate that with the weather data that we have.
You know, when you look at an ice field that's 750 square miles, when you look at a glacier that towers hundreds of feet high, you get a sense of permanence. You think these things are massive, they're somehow a permanent sort of feature, and yet in a very short period of time, in a matter of a couple of decades, we've seen dramatic change in those things.
At Exit Glacier, we have a time-lapse camera set up on the glacier that allows us to take a couple photos every single day, and then to put that sequence of photos into a video where we can see changes of the glacier and the vegetation phenology throughout an entire year.
Virtually all the glaciers in Alaska are receding. Some glaciers are moving forward. That's not an indication that they're actually growing in size. It's just the rate at which they're slipping down the mountain.
In some cases, some of these glaciers are receding back up onto land, and so they're producing less ice. When you change the glacier systems, you're changing habitat for marine mammals and other wildlife. And the populations of harbor seals have dropped dramatically in the fjords. In 1980, shortly after the establishment of the park, in Island Bay, we had maybe 1,500 harbor seals. Nowadays, you know, it's a few hundred.
In Arctic environments, much of the sunlight that reaches the Earth bounces back because it hits snow and reflects off into space, or ice on the ocean and reflects off into space. That's the albedo effect. When the snow thaws and instead you have rock or vegetation, or when the ice thaws and you have transparent ocean, the sunlight will convert to other wavelengths. It'll convert essentially to warmth. That does not bounce back into the atmosphere as much. So consequently, you get a warming of the ocean, you get a warming of the ground, you get a thawing of frozen soils or permafrost, you get a more rapid thawing of sea ice. So once the ice and once the snow is off of the surface, the rate of warming increases considerably.
If you're driving out to Exit Glacier, you'll actually start to see signs along the side of the road that have dates on them. Visitors sometimes are confused. They think they're elevations or something until they get up to the glacier and realize, oh, those were all date signs along the road that were telling me when the glacier was there. Another thing that's been happening in the Exit Glacier area in recent years is this flooding that comes at a time we're not used to. We're used to having maybe some flooding in the fall when we have a lot of heavy rain. This has suddenly been some flooding that's coming in the middle of the summer, usually not associated with precipitation events. It's associated with warmer weather and melting. When you walk down one of our trails that leads to Exit Glacier, there are a number of ways to get out there, but what used to be the main route is no longer really the main route because of the way the glacier has changed. So this main route to the glacier used to provide dramatic views of the glacier as you walk towards it. In fact, there was a large kiosk built at the end of this trail for people to stop and rest and enjoy the view of the glacier. Now, if they stop and rest at this kiosk, people think, why did the park put a kiosk here? Because it looks out at some shrubs. And there's no glacier within view anymore.
The way we solve big problems like this is not all at once. There's a thing called the Sokolov's wedges, and you just take a little bite of the pie, one sliver at a time. So we try to do incremental changes.
When we talk to people about our concerns about climate change, about the changes that are happening to the glacier, we also want to leave them with some idea of what we're doing to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. For example, here at the park, as we retire vehicles out of our fleet, we try to replace them with electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. We've done things like at the AKwx Nature Center, helping to sort of experiment and install a cutting-edge fuel cell as opposed to running some traditional power source out there that relies on some sort of more greenhouse-producing gas.
My main hope for the future is that people get the message that the planet is changing fairly rapidly in places, particularly places like Kenai Fjords National Park, and that it is, we think, there's good evidence it's a result of atmospheric changes, which are measured in terms of human inputs into the atmosphere.
The rapid rate at which these glaciers are changing now offers us the opportunity to talk about this place as a way of looking into the future. In a lot of parts of the country, climate change issues are a little more subtle, and we can point here and say, look how fast this is changing. This is what the future holds for perhaps a lot of us and a lot of the planet as climate continues to change.
I'm optimistic that people and nature will adapt to change, but my expectation is that change will occur. Time will tell.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at coastal water forecast for tomorrow, Saturday, along the southeast coast, westerly winds 20 knots on the south coast, seas 7 feet, west 15 knots on the north coast with 6-foot seas, and variable winds at 10 for the central southern inside water areas, seas running 2 to 3 feet there, with Lynn Canal seeing small craft advisories, especially in the afternoon. Out of the south, 25 knots, 5-foot seas. And for Sunday, southerly winds at 20 knots for Lynn Canal, seas at 4 feet. Otherwise lighter over the central and southern inside waters, mostly from the south at 10, and seas pretty slight. Out along the coast, central and south coast, southerlies at 15 with 5-foot seas, and the north coast, southeast 15 knots, 5 to 6-foot seas. Prince William Sound, southwest at 10 with 2-foot seas. Same forecast is, the forecast same with southwest winds at 10 knots for Cook Inlet. And Kamishak Bay, southeast at 15, while the Barren Islands looking at light east winds at about 15 knots, and the North Gulf Coast, west-southwest, 10 to 15 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas. And for Sunday, northern Cook Inlet, east winds at about 10 knots with 2-foot seas. South of the Foreland Zone, northeast at 10, becoming east at 20 knots for Kamishak Bay, as well as the Barren Islands with 4 to 5-foot seas. East winds at 20 knots, seas 5 feet for the western North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound. Winds will be out of the east generally at 15 knots, and the eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast of 15. Kodiak Island, on the east side, they're pretty light out of the west at 10 knots, but Shelikof Strait looking at northeast winds at 20 knots. Swinging around to southwest 20 knots for Bristol Bay, and west 20 for the Alaska Peninsula. Seas running at about 5 feet. And the outlook for Sunday for Bristol Bay, east winds 15 knots, turn northeast there on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. And the Pacific side of the peninsula, north at 20 with 6-foot seas. Sitkinak to Castle Cape, winds will be out of the east at 15, and also the 15-knot easterlies for the east side of Kodiak Island. And for Unalaska Island, we'll see west-northwest winds 15 to 20 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas, and for Unimak Island, mostly west-northwest at 15, light northwest winds, Adak and Atka, and northwest 15 for areas from Manchitka Island to Shimia. For Sunday, for the western Aleutians, west winds to south winds at 15 knots with 4-foot seas, central Aleutians west 15, and for the eastern Aleutians, call it west at about 20 knots on average with 5 to 6-foot seas. Moving up to the southwest coast, winds will be out of the northwest tomorrow at 20 knots there across Nunivak Island with seas running at about 5 feet. Northwest 20 also for St. Matthew Island with 5-foot seas, and the Pribilofs looking pretty good wind-wise tomorrow. they'll be out of the west at 15 with seas running at about 4 feet, but small craft advisories to St. Lawrence Island. A little breezier up that way. We're looking at sustained northerlies at 25 knots, Norton Sound north 20. Outlook for Sunday. St. Lawrence Island coming down to 15 knots out of the northeast, and St. Matthew Island northeast at 15 knots. Pribilos looking at a northwest breeze at 15, and east-southeast 15 knots for the southwest coast. And for the Arctic coast, pretty light out of the north, 5 to 10 knots for the eastern Boulevard Sea coastline. Central coast northeast at 10, and the west side there looking at northeast winds 15 knots, but then we've got small craft advisories from Cape Beaufort all the way down to Wales for northeast becoming north at 25 knots. And for Sunday, those will drop back down to 15 knots from the north from Wales up to Cape Beaufort, and then the western Arctic coast, winds will be out of the west at 15. Central coast south 15, and the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline looking at east to southeast winds only at 10 knots. For tonight, chance of showers on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, along with some fog and low clouds. It could be pretty widespread along the central Arctic coast, but it should stay clear with gusty east winds along the northwest coast and possibly to St. Lawrence Island with some low clouds and fog over much of the Bering Sea and Aleutians. Chance of rain Kodiak Island. Rain likely, though, at times over the Panhandle, and diminishing showers south central Alaska will stay cloudy and showery over really the southern two-thirds of the state through tomorrow. Some scattered afternoon thunderstorms. Periods of rain or showers for the Panhandle and Kodiak Island, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, with low clouds and fog continuing over the Bering Sea. And the outlook for Sunday, more rain for Kodiak Island due to another front coming up from the south. Light rain, fog, and drizzle along the North Gulf Coast, but clouds, showery, and cool temperatures continue over the southern half or two-thirds of the state.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.